It's time for the Property Podcast, where every week tens of thousands of property investors, new and experienced, join together to get news, knowledge and laughs at our expense. With me, Rob Bence.
And me, Rob Dix. Join us every Thursday morning for your weekly dose of property ideas and motivation. Then head over to our website at thepropertypodcast.com to keep the conversation going. Now though, let's get started.
Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of the Property Podcast. We're up to episode 75. I'm Rob B. With me, as always, is Rob D. Hello Rob, how are you?
I am very well indeed, thank you Rob. I am joining you from Budapest this week. I've just got here from Prague. I'm going to be hanging out here for a week or two, but not for too long because we've got to get back for the Property Hub meetup, of course, which is coming up in just a couple of weeks' time now. But in this episode 75, we should have really saved this for episode 101 because we're going to be talking about Property Investment Room 101. We're going to be having a bit of a moan about some of the things that we don't like in property investment. But it's going to be educational as well as moany, and we've got all the usuals as well. We've got the reviews, we've got the news, we've got the resource of the week. We've got a lot to pack in. We have.
I'll tell you what, Robert, if I find it difficult to keep up with where you are, because I started this call before we started recording and said, how's Prague? And now you're in Budapest. I'm speaking to you nearly every day. So I don't know how our listeners are keeping up. And speaking of international, we're going to keep with our international reviews for another week. A thank you to everybody worldwide who continues to leave us reviews. If you're enjoying the show, please do leave a review. We really appreciate it, and we absolutely do read every single one. So if you'd like to be on the show in the next couple of weeks, then go to iTunes and leave us a review. But a round of applause to the following, please. So this first one, Rob, is from Hong Kong. Okay, and it says...
Been there.
Yeah, you're definitely gonna outdo me on location, unless they're UK based, and I might have a go. Rob and Rob, I listen to the Property Podcast and the Property News Radio podcast on my daily commute, and I find the content valuable and enjoyable. Although I've been listening to this podcast since day one, it's taken me at least 6 months to get around to leaving a review, and this is about the same time it's taken me to find a suitable property. This delay is not due to analysis paralysis, but just not being able to find any time to do the research. I'm living in Hong Kong and I'm looking to purchase my third UK property, and I found your Investing from Afar episode very useful. My current property investments have been good earners, but your approach has led me to question if I can get a better deal. Keep up the good work, Brian. Thank you, Brian. And then, not as far away, Rob, and I think we've both been here, Ireland.
Oh, haven't been there. That's embarrassing. I shouldn't admit that on the podcast, should I?
Yes! I win! We've got two short ones. First one says, invaluable from Long Distance Investor. Great podcast. I've been listening since the start and I've been able to put a whole lot of learning into practice with my own investments. Lots of useful arguments to help you convince the other half too. Thank you, Leon. And Lou B from Ireland says, I must listen to. Hey guys, a great podcast. Love the content and all the arguments with regards to property investment. It's full of relevant information that is needed to form a solid foundation for any investment. Love it. Keep it coming, guys. Cheers. Thank you. And then we've got a few more international ones, but UK. People in the UK, if you want to leave us a review, please do, because we're going back there week after next. So if you want to leave a review before then, we'll read out in the next couple of weeks.
We will. Now, a couple of things to talk about before we get into the rest of the episode. First of all, we've got a new course up on the Property Hub, and it is a great one. It's all about buying to sell, so making some serious cash from property flipping. And for this one, we've got a real expert. We've got Susanna Cole from the Good Property Company in to help us put this course together. It is free to Property Hub Plus members, of course, and it's great value for everyone else because the tips that she shares could literally save you tens of thousands. So if flipping is something that you do and want to get better at, or that you're interested in doing, you might want to check it out. So just go to thepropertyhub.net/products and you'll see it there alongside all our other courses, several of which are free. So if you haven't been to our products page before, do it because you'll find some really great free stuff there as well.
Okay, so our news story of the week, Rob, comes via Richard Brown. And it's an interesting one and quite timely, and I'm not surprised. I think I'm glad to see this article go up, and it's about get rich quick property schemes. So we've got our own Property Room 101, and I'm sure this article, well, I know this article is going to link in a little bit with what we're talking about anyway. So Emma Lund's put this article together, and I've spoken to Emma before, so I'm glad she's put this together. And it's basically about property companies, property education companies, property investment companies, not being very ethical, charging a lot of money and delivering big promises and big dreams. She notes how to get started. She notes adverts in the papers and through mail shots saying how to get started in property with just £1,500 and 10 hours a week. I've not cracked that one, Rob, have you?
I must say I have not. So
No?
clearly doing something wrong.
Yeah, there's loads in there that it's well worth a read. Property investment clubs that persuade people to hand over their cash in advance so that it can be invested in bricks and mortar for them. They often make tempting promises of impressive yields and guaranteed returns. And the article says the trouble is many fail to deliver on the promises or don't have the assets to back up the guarantees. If you're ever asked to pay money up front for an investment, do not do it. If they can deliver, then they won't ask for money up front. Always be wary if people ask for money up front. But I won't say too much more, Rob, because I've got a feeling this might come up in our Property Room 101.
I think it will. But yeah, the article is worth the read. It's really well put together. We take stories from the Telegraph quite a lot. That's because their property coverage is some of the best out there. It's a good article and it's interesting because it is an indicator worth keeping an eye on, these kind of get-rich-quick seminars. They are the sort of thing that you often start seeing as the market approaches the top. I think this time it's a little bit more complicated because we might see parts of the UK where the market's approaching at the top and parts where there's a long way to go. But it's still interesting that these things are starting to make a comeback. So it's worth reading the story in full. You'll find this link and all other links, as always, at the show notes, which this week are at thepropertyhub.net/room101.
This week's main topic, Rob. We've been a little bit lazy, haven't we? Because we've got to credit someone else for this.
Yep. So credit for this episode goes to Pete Matthew of the Meaningful Money podcast. He had his own Room 101 episode a while back talking about the things that annoyed him in his industry. So we thought, what a great way to steal an episode for ourselves and do some moaning of our own. And his episode on it wasn't just moany, it was really useful as well. So we're hoping to follow in his footsteps. So thank you, Pete. So we've just picked out a few things each that really get on our nerves in property investment, and we're going to talk about each of those in turn. Rob, do you want to go first?
Yeah, my first one, I'm not going to blanket every single one of these, which I'm about to say. So before I talk about them, I'm sure there are some good ones. I know there are some good ones. I'm sure there's some average ones. It's just when they're bad, they seem really bad. And I'm talking about surveyors. So surveyors are an ongoing bugbear for many, many property investors. Sometimes they exceed your expectations, sometimes they meet them, but often they can fall short. Over the years, I've seen crazy things happening, but some of the stuff I'm going to reference now of some of the things I witnessed have all been in the last 12 months. In the last 12 months, I've seen my first ever down valuation, and I couldn't believe it. There wasn't a single property comparable, sold or on the market, for what this property was valued at. It was in good condition, and still it got downvalued. And the surveyor, if you've ever tried to appeal, don't bother, because they just are too proud to change their minds. So that's a down valuation with no comparables, no sales to justify it, but still went ahead. Balmy. I don't know why. The other properties next door were all valued up. So go figure that one. Inconsistent valuations. Okay, here's a more recent story, and this happened with one of our clients at RMP, Neil. Hello, Neil. He bought cash just over 6 months ago with the intention of refinancing because he bought below market value. So he just bought just over 80,000. Now he sent surveyors out. 2 surveyors went out. These identical properties in terms of layout. One was valued at 100. Okay, so that's good. And one was valued at 110. Even better. So why am I moaning? Because, there's 20 and 30 grand uplift in 6 months with, no work being done. It was brand new. The reason why is these surveyors were from the same company, but they valued it 10% different. We're not talking about a percent. That's a huge difference. How can one value one at 100 and one value one at 110? It just doesn't make sense. They were identical properties. So inconsistent valuations are bugbear. Yes, they valued it up. Yes, they valued it up considerably, from 80 to 100 and 80 to 110, that's 50 grand in total. So we should be celebrating and happy. That's a great turnaround in 6 months. But how can 2 surveyors have 2 completely different valuations going out in the same week from the same firm? Just baffles me. And then finally, just generally strange behaviour. I've had a client revalue one of his properties recently. When the valuer went in, he was questioning until how he got it so cheap. So the valuer couldn't believe the price he got it for, but then wouldn't value it above the price he got it for. So the surveyor wanted to know how he got such a good deal, but then wouldn't value it up. How does that work? It's just so crazy, the market at the moment. You never know what you're going to get. And then finally, you can get the flip. I've had valuers in the last 6 months value it above what we said the value was. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but say it was worth 100, we thought. They got it for 80, and the valuer came back at 110, something like that. The numbers aren't exact, but I've talked about it on the podcast before. All this has happened in the last 6 months. So overvaluations, down valuations, inconsistent valuations, and just downright strange behaviour. This is a moaning episode, isn't it, Rob?
It is. You're off to a great start with the moaning. I'm impressed. But
I've waited to episode 75.
Yeah, I was going to put surveyors on my list, but I knew that it was going to appear on yours, so I thought I'd leave it off. But yeah, rightfully so. And you're right. It's not just the fact that they're being conservative and downvaluing things. It's that it is just all over the place and you never know. It just makes it very hard to plan for anything. Yeah, it is a totally legitimate bugbear, but also, as you said, not the case all the time. So in last week's episode, we talked about how surveyors can be a really useful source of information if you're trying to keep on top of your local market. There's good and there's bad, and they can work for you or against you, but that inconsistency is definitely annoying. Okay, my first one is something that I encounter every day, and you'll be encountering every day if you're in a buying mode at the moment. And it's nothing serious, but it does annoy me. And it's really stupid property descriptions on listings on places like Rightmove and Zoopla. Estate agents are not journalists, they're not novelists. I get that. I'm very picky about writing because it's what I do. But there's some of the things that they put in there, like not just typos, but it's the phrases that get to me. Things like benefits from, as in benefits from a bedroom and a roof, and things like that. They'll have the phrase "in our opinion" to try and get round any accusations that they're not being accurately. So they'll be like, but they'll literally be like, "In our opinion, this is a house," or "In our opinion, this is in a good location," and it's just annoying because it kind of gets on your nerves when you have to read all these silly things all the time. But also, it doesn't tell you anything useful that you want to know. So you don't know if you're going out and you're wasting your time actually doing a viewing, because the information will just be using this strange kind of euphemistic / not really wanting to commit to anything kind of language. And often the photos will be rubbish as well, which is a whole other moan in itself. And so you really won't know what the heck the property is all about until you've committed maybe half an hour of your time going there and seeing it. So stupid property descriptions really get on my nerves. And in fact, this is something that came up when we were talking to Susanna for the course as well, because she insists on writing her own descriptions. And she says when the agents she uses are really resistant to it because they are nervy about things being described correctly so they can't get into trouble. But she says that she has to do it herself because it's a big part of selling the property. It's the photos and the description are the things that work together to actually get people through the door. And unless you get people through the door, you're not going to sell it. So it is something that's important and is pretty much always done badly. So I guess this is a moan without much of a point to it, except to say that if you are actually selling a property, maybe do consider talking to your agent and checking over their description to make sure that it's not as rubbish as it normally is. Yeah.
You are definitely on the ball when it comes to writing, Mr. Dix. There's no doubt about that. So I can see why this definitely gets to you. But even me, some of the stuff you see, you're just like, what? Is that really being written? So I can understand why it annoys you, especially you, Rob. There's no doubt about that. Okay, my next one, I think, is one that we both really don't like, and it's expensive property courses. Now, before I go any further, I've got no problem with people charging for their time. You know, Susanna Cole, for example, is very highly regarded, and she charges for courses, but it's reasonable. But there are courses out there, and that article we talked about talks about them. What they do is they lure you in with a free 2-hour education course, which is nothing but a big sales pitch. Then they'll get you on a semi-expensive course for a weekend, which costs normally about $1,000. And then they'll try and sell you on that. That's not the end. Then they'll try and sell you on that course for several £1,000s, get you all excited about the future. The big thing that really pees me off about these expensive property courses is the huge, huge promises of big wealth really quickly. Now, they get you to set huge goals, and we love huge goals, but I often find that people who've been to these property courses come in to see me at RMP to do strategy, and with goals that are just, well, not realistic. You've got to set big goals. You've got to set stretching goals, but I'll be extreme, so I won't reference anyone in particular, but saying I've got 10 grand and I want to be a millionaire in 12 months. I met a couple recently and they've been on a few property courses and they said I was the first person that told them that their goals were a stretch and probably not realistic. All the courses, people that they'd spoken to were saying, yeah, anything's possible. Let's move on to the next course, because they don't really care about what happens after you've signed up. They just want you to sign up. There's nothing wrong with saying you can make money from property. You can, but making it easier than it seems, I think is just wrong. To say, oh, look, this person's now financially free in 12 months. Well, yes, they are, but they pretty much worked full time for a whole year to do that. Could you quit your job now for 12 months to become financially free? Most people can't. So you've got to sort of take all these big claims with a pinch of salt, maybe a handful of salt, and go, wait there, is this realistic or am I getting just caught up in the excitement? And especially now the media is building property up more and more and more. You've got to be careful of these property education companies that make big, big promises, but actually very, very little is delivered. You know, they prey on your enthusiasm and your commitment to move forward in the wrong way. Nothing wrong with paying for time, but be careful of these expensive courses where big promises are made. And ask, if you are signing up for a course, always ask, if I pay for this course, am I going to be sold something else on that course that I go to? Because then you just know you're just part of a funnel. The Property Podcast, 75 episodes, half an hour each of free education. The Property Hub, full of free education. Quite a few of the courses that we have, free education. The Property Hub, yes, it's, 30 odd quid a month, but there's dozens of courses in there. And if you don't like it, you can get out after 30 quid. So £30 for all those courses is unbelievable value. There's lots and lots you can do for, little money in books, £5 to £10 for a book. A lot of these courses, these words aren't mine. In the Millionaire Fast Lane, MJ DeMarco says people who sign up for expensive courses, and he says low price courses, a few £100s are fine. But people who sign up for expensive courses, his words, so before people get peed off, are lazy because they just want it done for them. They just want a quick fix. Oh, I'll go on the course and I'll make my money. Property can make you wealthy. If you want to do it very quickly, you're going to have to put a lot of work in. Or if you don't want to put a lot of work in, accept that you can get rich, but slowly. You can't have both. If you want to get rich through property quickly, you've got to graft. You've got to put the hard yards in. You've got to put the time in. And, and a bit of luck as well, I might add. But if you want to, almost guarantee results, almost, not fully, if you take a sensible long-term approach, you can do it. The choice is yours. Everyone's different. I've got to say, the marketing tactics of some of these companies are a little annoying.
They certainly are. And it is so frustrating to see people who are just bouncing from course to course. You'll get people who spend enough for a hefty deposit on a property just on going and being told things that they could have learned for free elsewhere or for a tenner in a book. And sort of supposedly getting a bit of motivation as well. And people say that the courses are good for motivation, but you can get that by just forming a mastermind group with other investors and do it for free. You don't need all that stuff. And it feels like every course has kind of got a couple of poster children who they sort of wheel out to show what great results can be got. And people do get great results from some of these courses. But in my opinion, most of these people would have been successful anyway. Because some people are just intrinsically motivated and will do what it takes to succeed. And they would have done that have they gone on the course or not. The only difference is that they would have had more money to actually invest in property had they not invested in the course. We've talked about this plenty before, but it's worth bringing up again because it's difficult sometimes to differentiate between courses where there's someone with genuine expertise sharing what they know in a way that's going to help you, and when it's just a sales pitch. Not always easy to tell the difference, but it's worth asking whatever questions you need to ask to make that distinction so you can be confident going in. Okay, so my next one. My first one was a little bit trivial, so I thought I'd make up for it with the next one. So what gets to me is the entire property transaction system. How about that?
Just the entire system.
Yeah, nothing
Not
more
a bit
than
of it, all of it.
All of it. Whole thing. Because it is nuts, isn't it? And I'm going to link to a guest post in the show notes that we had from Nick Stott, one of our guest bloggers over at the Property Hub. And the article is called Why England and Wales Should Buy and Sell Property Like the Scots. And he's right, because in Scotland, they've actually got a really sensible system when it comes to buying and selling property. I won't read out the whole article, but essentially in Scotland, if you're selling a property, it's upon you to provide all the information that someone might reasonably need, all the things that you normally would only pick up in a survey. So it'll talk about certificates for building work and what the central heating is and all kinds of stuff. So all that information will be freely available to all buyers before they even view it. So you're not going to waste your time on a viewing if you know that it's not going to be suitable. And then once a buyer has made an offer, that offer is binding. And doesn't that just all make so much more sense? Because otherwise, you go and you look at a property and you're just like, okay, well, this looks fine. But then to actually find out, to get to the truth of what the situation is, you're going to have to invest a lot of your own time and a lot of your own money in terms of legal fees and maybe getting a survey done and all that kind of thing before you can actually establish whether it's something you want to buy at all. So it's a huge waste of time and money. You also get the situation from the vendor's point of view where because offers aren't binding and basically until you get to exchange all bets are off, that you can go through this whole process and then for any reason, the buyer can just go, nah. And you're set back by weeks, which can just cause chaos, especially if you're in a chain. It is just crazy that this process, it's like for us, it's annoying because it's time and it's money. But for someone who's dealing with their residential home, they maybe only buy or sell one or two houses in their lifetime. It's not just annoying, it's incredibly stressful and it has a real impact on people's lives. And so it just does seem insane that we have this system for something which is so important to people and involves such large amounts of money. I know it's broad, but I do think that the entire system could be a lot better. And I think the Scottish way of doing things doesn't keep people happy in all respects. There's lots of landlord legislation up there that people don't like very much. But in this respect, I think they've got it right.
Yeah, I can't agree more. The system is awful. It's absolutely awful. You think we would have figured out a better way. It's just so inefficient. It's unbelievable. Now, I've got to say, I don't know the Scottish system as well, but from what I've read in Nick's post and obviously what you've said, it just seems a far better way of doing things.
Well, the thing is, it's like, yeah, I guess you have to think like if no one had ever bought or sold a house before and you were going to invent a way for these transactions to happen today, would you invent it to be the way that we do it now? Of course you wouldn't. It's insane. And that's effectively what they did in Scotland. They had a chance to start afresh and they've come up with something quite sensible. I don't have any experience using the system personally, but it just seems like a heck of a lot more sensible.
It does. Right. Okay. My next one is, I feel like I really ranted today. It's more general, really, kind of linked to some of the stuff we've talked about throughout this episode already. And I'm just going to label them property sharks. So, property sharks. Well, what can you say about them? They exist in all aspects. They exist in lettings, they exist in estate agents, they exist in property investment companies, there are sources, there are landlords, there are tenants. They exist in property. And maybe just because I work in property on a daily basis that I'm exposed to it more, so I feel it more, but it just seems that there's far more sharks in property than many, many other industries. And I think because there's money in the industry and it's unregulated in many, many sectors that so many sharks exist. And I think it's such a shame because property can be such a fantastic tool for wealth creation over the long term that why does it attract so many of these just wrong, nasty people? You know, some of the nastiest people, some of the worst people I've met in life have been in the property industry. I've also met some of the nicest, I might add. So that, you know, I've seen extremes both ends. But it's such a shame it exists because I believe there's many other people out there who would invest in property, but they're scared because of the reputation of the industry. You know, there's people who will use their own brokers, do their own management, not work with other experts and so on because they just struggle to find out who's a shark and who's not. And I've got to tell you, I've been bitten many, many times by sharks. Property sources, the people I work with to bring the deals together, some are good, but most are just a load of cowboy Del boys. You know, they're absolutely awful. Letting agents, one of the reasons we set yellow lettings up. It's because there's just so many poorly performing letting agents, and actually quite a few sharks too. There's some great letting agents out there like Homeshore, but there's so many bad ones. So that prompted us to start Yellow. RMP, property. We just try and be ethical and good and help people out when things go wrong, and we stand out. You think that would be the standard, the norm, but it turns out helping people and being genuine helps you stand out in an industry. It just makes me sad. It just annoys me. I can deal with it, but sometimes it just gets me down when I speak to people who've been taken advantage of, and I do speak to people who've been taken advantage of, by people who have promised big things and just basically lied through their teeth to get people's money. And there's people in the industry, and I won't name any names. In fact, one's been named in the article, so read that article if you want, who have gone out, lost lots of people's money before, ruined people financially, and have come back into the industry and started again. It's just a shame. So what can you do about it? Go and listen to episode 45. We put a course together on how can you avoid property sharks. Go and listen to it before you deal with anybody in a serious way. If you're going to hand over money for any sort of transaction in property, of any considerable sum, go and listen to that course first, because you can save yourself a considerable amount of money. One of the things we said on that episode is ask for recommendations. Go on the Property Hub. If you want a letting agent, a broker, a property sourcer, a property company, a mentor, whatever it may be, go and ask on the Property Hub, because there's some fantastic people in there. You would expect me to say that, but they're such a friendly bunch. They will guide you in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a double-edged sword for you, Rob, because it must be really frustrating that companies like yours, so many of them are bad that you could easily get tarred with the same brush. But at the same time, you can stand out just by not being awful. So it's got to be a funny one. It's just such a mixed bag. Like before I started speaking to a lot of people in property, I kind of had this perception that everyone was a shark, because you do hear such horror stories, and they really do happen, and they happen on a fairly regular basis. But then when I started speaking to people and working off recommendations, and therefore speaking to the right people, I realized that property has some of the nicest and most helpful people I've ever come across as well. So it really is about just kind of like feeling your way through the shark-infested waters to find the right people to work with, because there are some amazing people. You just have to be very careful about the ones who are trying to extract your money from you. Okay, so my last moan of the day. I'm enjoying this. I'm sad it's the last one.
And I like this one you've about to do as well. I completely agree with this one too.
Yeah, so this one is landlord licensing. The thing about this that annoys me is it's that most landlords are good. Most landlords are really good. And it's so often painted as being the opposite. It's painted the fact that all landlords are greedy and negligent and money grabbing, and there's a few good ones. But no, it's the other way round. It's just so easy to score political points by sort of bashing landlords. That's all well and good. It's okay. We don't have to be sensitive about it. It's okay if people want to make these presumptions about us. But the problem is when policy then happens off the back of that, which doesn't make any sense. And landlord licensing there are so many examples that just seem to be a classic case of that. So landlord licensing effectively is when local councils decide that in order to be a landlord, you need to have each property licensed. You need to get a bit of paper that you have to pay a lot of money for to say that your property is licensed. I think sometimes they're meant to come out and inspect, but I think most of the time they don't. I think most of the time they just charge you like 500 quid to get a bit of paper for a few years. There are times when there's a legitimate reason for doing this, and the reasons that they use are often to do with low demand in an area or bringing the troubled areas back up to scratch. But a lot of the time they seem to use it just for the heck of it, because it's something that they can do, they've got the power to do, and it makes it look like they're doing something. The problem is that they don't have the resources or the powers to find the bad landlords. So the bad landlords are there, but they're very good at flying under the radar, and the councils just don't have the money to go after them. So instead, to make it look like they're doing something, they bring in licensing. So then all the good landlords then have to pay money to get a license. The bad landlords still don't bother, and therefore the council has just raised money from everyone who was doing the right thing in the first place, and the people who are doing the wrong thing keep on doing the wrong thing, and there's nothing they can do about it. This is happening in Liverpool at the moment. There are proposals for licensing going through, and there was lots of discussion in the Property Hub about it. Someone brought up the fact that in the consultation, they already had HMO licensing, and the council had no idea how many HMOs there were, how many of them were licensed and how many of them should be licensed. And so it's like, well, if you can't do that with HMOs where there are far fewer of them, how are you going to do this in any kind of effective way with every rental property in Liverpool? It just doesn't make any sense. And okay, maybe there are times when it does make sense, but it narks me that often it's the case that people who are doing the right thing end up getting punished because some people are doing the wrong thing. So yeah, landlord licensing, when applied incorrectly, really annoys me. And it also can have consequences beyond just having to pay for the license as well, because lenders don't like to lend often in areas where licensing is in force. And I think that's because if they did have to repossess the property, they would then be the license holder and they would have to deal with all that. Maybe that position will change if licensing becomes more widespread, because lenders wouldn't be able to be that choosy. But at the moment, it can have serious impacts on people. So if there is a proposal for licensing in an area where you've got a property, don't just ignore it and think it will go away or think it doesn't mean anything. It's worth getting together with other landlords in your area to see if there's a case for fighting it. Because maybe it's a legitimate thing, maybe it's going to have a benefit for the area, but there's a good chance it isn't.
Wow. I thought this was going to be a short episode, but clearly after 75 episodes, we needed to get a bit off our chest. So thank you for everyone who went through that. I hope you don't feel too bad. Maybe, Rob, we can link in the show notes some happy puppies to make up for our negativity. So if you go to the show notes, which is thepropertyhub.net/room 101, you can find all the links we've talked about, all the show notes, and a video of happy looking puppies to make up for what we've moaned about. So actually, we are actually very chirpy, positive guys. But I suppose 1 in every 75 are allowed to have a moan.
We clearly had a lot bottled up, but I hope I feel better for it. And I hope there's maybe a useful lesson in there as well. But at the very least, we feel better. That's what matters.
It does. Okay, Rob, resource of the week. You put this one in, so I'll let you read it out and explain what it is.
Okay. I'm never sure if we have a no swearing policy on this podcast or not. This is a word I don't particularly want to say. So the URL you will find in the show notes, the correct URL, but for now I'm going to call it goeffingdoit.com. So you can fill in the blank yourself. The idea of this is quite a fun one. So we talk about accountability a lot, and we talk about masterminds and everything else. Maybe you want to put some money on the line though. So you put in what you want to do, what your goal is. You put in when you're going to have achieved it by, and you set a penalty amount. And then you also choose a friend of yours to be responsible for holding you accountable. And so then by the date that you say you're going to have done it by, the system will ask you and ask your friend if you've done it or not. And if you haven't, then your money that you put up goes to your friend. And maybe you've got an agreement with them that it can go to charity or something. But either way, you've got money on the line here. So it's a bit of a, I don't know how to say it. It feels like having sort of money at stake isn't the best motivation. There should be something more intrinsic. But if it works for you, then it works. So if you want to break your analysis paralysis maybe and get that first property, maybe goeffingdoit.com is the way to do it. Put up a couple £100 and see if that increases your motivation.
I think a couple of £100 at stake would motivate a lot of people, Rob. I'd probably give up or start a lot for a couple of £100.
Yeah. So, and there's lots of examples on the site of people who've used it to run marathons and finish their thesis and that kind of thing. So maybe there's something to it. I'll be interested to hear if anyone's given it a go, but it's a really interesting idea.
It is. Have a look. It's in the show notes, which once again is thepropertyhub.net/room 101. Next week on the podcast, we're doing buying to sell. Susanna Cole has just put a course together for the Property Hub Plus. Thank you, Susanna. We're going to bring some of that to the podcast so you can, if you're not a member of the Property Hub Plus, you can still benefit from her knowledge. So we're going to take some of the notes from there, some of the key action points, and bring it to a podcast. And also, obviously, an episode we've not done. And buying to sell, for some people, is a strategy that can be successfully implemented. So make sure you join us for that one next week. No moaning, I promise.
Absolutely not. A moan-free zone. And please, this might not be the best time to ask for it, but do leave us a review and don't mention how miserable we are when you leave that review. But if you do enjoy the show normally, please do leave us a review on iTunes. If you go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast or just go to the show notes, you'll find an easy link on the right-hand side that'll send you straight over there. We'd love to get your reviews and we'd love to read them out on the show.
And if this is your first episode you're listening to, please listen to a few more before you leave a review. We are very happy. Right, well, thank you for joining us on our therapy session, which we've called a podcast. I do appreciate it. We're back next week with how to implement a buy-to-sell strategy. But until then, thank you, everybody, once again, for leaving us reviews and supporting the podcast. We do appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Property Podcast. Make sure you join our mailing list at thepropertypodcast.com.
And remember, we love 5-star reviews. Rob even loves them more than air miles.